It looks like it's working. That's good.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. We'll make a start now. Thank you all for joining us today for this session. For those who do not know me, I'm Zaira Zamudio from Riverine Plains, and I will be facilitating this session. This webinar is part of a broader series of events we've been running as part of this project, which is the on-farm water management project. And this project aims to support farmers and land managers in improving their on-farm water management. A little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. Please drop your questions in the chat. We'll have a section dedicated to the Q&A at the end. The webinar will go from 7:05 now and until 8:15 tonight. And please have the resources we sent yesterday by email handy. Tonight we'll be working mainly with the workbook, so having that in hand will be enough. And yeah, and that we will be recording this session and we will be sharing with you after. Now, just to make sure we're all in the same page, here's a quick rundown of the resources you should have received by email. First, you will have the example plan, a complete farm water management plan for a fictional farm. We will be referring to this during tonight's session. Then you have to receive the plan template, which is a blank template for creating your own plan. You can use this in your laptops or print. And then you'll have the plan workbook, which is similar to the plan template, but it has an example. So it guides you through the example, and then it gives you time and space to fill your own data. And you can use this during the webinar. And also you've received a workshop tools sheet with useful tools to support your planning. And apart from these materials, we'll also be referring to the Ag Guide Farm Water. We do not have the PDF version of that one, but we have hard copies available at the office. So if you want one, just please come by the office or send me your address and we can organize a delivery for you. Grayson has already shared his address, so I will be waiting to hear from the rest of you before sending the copies, probably tomorrow. Let me know as soon as possible if you like one. And if anyone just joined today and hasn't received the email with the materials, please let me know, or Sophie, who is also there, and I'll send them after the session. Well, to give you some background on the project, the On-Farm Water Management Planning Project is designed to help farmers and land managers to prepare for drought and dry periods by providing practical tools and strategies through workshops and field days. The goal is to ensure that participants know their water numbers and water needs, understand the gaps in their current water management, and develop a plan to improve water quality, increase water security, and optimize their systems. I now would like to introduce Paul Simpson. He's the general coordinator of the project, and he will tell us a little bit about Drought Strategy and why are we working on these plans. Welcome,
No
Paul.
worries. Thanks, Sarah. If you want to stop sharing your screen, I can talk to the masses here. Welcome, everybody. My name's Paul Simpson. I'm with Local Land Services based out of Albury and helping groups such as Riverine Plains and a heap of other farmer-based organisations across the Murray to deliver some of these workshops. The section I'd like to talk about this evening rather is the first part of your workbook. So if you have a look at your workbook there, you will see that section on, let me just pick the page here, page 6 and 7. So let's start off with page 6. I've got it there in front of me, I think, which is a map. So can people see that. So this is a fictitious farm based on some real satellite image though, but it's what you might start with. Just a few paddocks, a couple of water sources, a bit of a geographic feature in the middle there. There's a ridge line running through here on this property, and this property doesn't have enough water, so they need to work out how to do that. So through this process that we're going to start to undertake tonight, that's where that journey begins. But I'm interested to start with if people have got any reflections on the previous dry spells or droughts, in particular around water, but might also be around some general stock feeding or just general husbandry there. I'm not sure, Sarah, can these guys unmute themselves to speak, or can you unmute the participants so they can put some comments in?
Yeah, they can enable their cameras and microphones now if they want to. So
cool.
Feel
No
free
worries.
to do that.
So has anyone got any comments about how things fared the last dry spell, even last autumn when some people's dams were starting to get a little bit dry already? I know that in some parts of the Upper Murray, certainly on the Victorian and the New South Wales side, early last year, there was very little summer rain. Autumn was pretty scarce, and that seemed to continue through the year. I wonder, Sophie, if you've got some experiences with land holes up your way, or even on the property that your family has got up that neck of the woods.
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly when it doesn't rain for a while, the water level in the dams drops a little bit. And with that, we know water quality declines as well, as the cattle have to walk in a little bit further, or sheep, depending which property you're on, to get the water, and then that will pug up the edges a little bit. And it's something you got to monitor very closely if you're relying on dams, and certainly with troughs there's always the need to monitor them very closely, but it's much easier to keep water cleaner, but ensuring that the tank levels are also adequate to support the number of stock that are in that paddock, and flow rates are also very important, because they all love to come and have a drink at the same time, so making sure that they will refill and everyone gets a drink.
Yeah, now there's some couple of really good points you mentioned there, Sophie, and I think one of the things that this section of the plan is thinking about your drought strategy and what triggers or what process you're going to look at. Now, a couple of really good resources here that are available. This template here is downloadable off the New South Wales DPI site, and it gives you some guidance on developing a drought strategy or a drought plan. The work we're doing here at the moment is not so much about this, but you need to be mindful and thinking about what are you going to do once things start to dry out. So you're going to want to keep all your stock, because you might have a really high value genetic breeding flock or herd, in which case you'll approach the issue differently. If you just run buy and sell trade cattle, well, you might just go, okay, I can afford to just get rid of every stock animal on this property. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have very high overheads. So it really depends on your enterprise. But this template guides you through some of the thinking around how you're going to walk into those situations. And this is a plan you would put together in the cool light of day before any dry season comes along, sitting around in the middle of winter when it's pouring rain, working out some of these rather weird things called a drought strategy or a dry plan. There's another document, pardon me, that's available, any local land services office, or you can actually download this one off the internet. Just search for this guide. It's got a lot of good parts in it, and that drought plan template is in this document as well in the appendix. So the reason we're talking about that and having a drought strategy is basically we want to come up with a target what are we aiming at when we are developing this plan? We're not looking at a normal season. We're looking at a season where it's getting very dry, or worst case scenario in a drought scenario. So there's a few questions in there on that page 7 to look at what you're going to think about as your goal. As I said, if you want to keep all 100% stocking rate, then you're going to have a little bit bigger reserve of water than someone who's going to decrease their stocking rate down to around 60%. And as it turns out, we had a landholder the other day who did one of our workshops, and when he said, these are the numbers that I've come down to, and those are the ones I'm going to look at. Once we'd worked out the DSE equivalent for all the stock classes, he was right around that 60%. In actual fact, I think he was actually down to 52% on a DSE basis, not stock numbers, on a DSE basis of his normal carrying capacity. So that was pretty close to the mark. So there's a few other questions in there that you can look at. And as we work through, some of those other things will become more important. There's a few really good resources around those you can look at as well. I'm just going to flick through, if you've got your plan in front of you there, flick through to page 26. And I'll just rip through this, Peter, so I don't steal any of your thunder on all the pictures and the calculations. We want page 26. I'm coming out. Here we go. So has everyone got page 26 in front of them? I can hear the yells from the back of the room. It's great. So this is a mocked up version of the same property, Wandering Park, I think it's called. And you can see here, there's a bit more infrastructure in place now. They've decided to put in some smaller paddocks here, and also put in some, let's just go down to the key here. So you can see here, they put in a large new dam, that dark blue one here. They've left this old dam over there open as a retained dam, non-fenced, as a bit of a environmental biodiversity asset. They put a couple of big tanks up on this ridge line here, which allows them to move the water from this new big dam, which has got really good catchment that they did the calculations for, up to the top here, and to reticulate down to this paddock system that they've developed. Because in their calculations, they worked out that if they set up that reticulation in those smaller paddocks, and by smaller paddocks, they might be 10 to 20 hectares or thereabouts, they can control their grazing, they can control their pasture management a lot better, and they can have year in, year out benefits from that infrastructure. So that's the sort of thing we're aiming towards, and that's part of our goal. And as someone said at one of our recent workshops, a goal without a plan is just wishful thinking. So I'm going to hand over to Peter, and he's going to help us start to take some steps to developing that plan, and I might leave it there. Any questions? We must be doing well.
Sarah, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just saying thank you, Paul, and that I put the template and the guide in the chat. If anyone wants to download it, they are there. Thank you, Paul, and welcome, Peter. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'll share my screen and we'll proceed from there. Hopefully it'll come up properly.
Excellent.
How's that? Hopefully you can see my full, all looking good. Great.
Yep.
All good.
Okay, so this is the first webinar. This is what we might cover this evening, what I've got in bold. There's a second webinar same time next week where we might cover those topics below and perhaps anything we don't really get through this evening. So we're going to look at mapping, or a little bit of it. That's probably Paul's covered that to sufficient extent. Farm water audit is the main thing we want to get through, and then looking at your storage and your losses. We'll see if we can get onto that as well. So to state the obvious, farm water is a vital aspect of farm planning, and water budgeting, which we're stepping into now, is a key to ensuring you have sufficient water. The workbook that Paul was just referring to, the plan workbook, has those 4 sections: weathering the dry, water metrics from drop to data, and know your flow. And part of know your flow is what are your options. Well, we'll leave part 1. Paul's touched on it for you to have a look at, and I want to step into part 2, the water metrics. And Paul's already mentioned that one, so we'll skip on. In terms of water metrics, the idea is to prepare a water budget, and it's getting a picture of your farm water supply situation. That's what we're after, but in a drought time or a dry time. We're not looking at average seasons situation. We're looking at a dry time. A key component, perhaps the key component, is working out the water requirements for your livestock. And in this case, I've taken information from the Agriculture Victoria website that you can see at the top there. And there's a table of various types of stock. And lactating ewes in summer might take anything up to 14 litres per head per day. If they're on irrigated pasture, which is pretty rare in a drought, they might be taking less than half of that, maybe about a third. If you've got lambs on dry pasture, they're taking about 6 litres per head per day. If you've got cattle, with grazing cattle, they're taking about 100 litres per head per day. If you like, in rough figures, the cattle are about 10 times as more, require about 10 times as more water as the sheep. Now that varies a lot because animal conditions, animal breeds and so on all have different requirements. And of course the climate, the particular weather that's happening at any time is really significant. There's a few more types of animals here, and I've taken those from the website shown there. If you've got horses, there's some estimates of their consumption. So lactating horses, 150 litres per head per day. Young ones, about 40 litres per head per day. And just dry horses, if I call them that, 50 litres per head per day. And should you be dealing with alpacas, they're around the same as sheep. I don't know that there's been that much extensive work done on them, but around 10 litres per head per day. Unfortunately, we have some other animals on the farm who also like to share the water. Can be goats, pigs or deer, depending on where you are in the state. You might have all of those or just some of them. And the estimates of water use, and I say estimates because we're not really sure how much some of these feral animals might drink. But we do need to make allowance for it, because if they're drinking it, then your stock can't. So goats, maybe up to 2.2 litres per day. Deer, perhaps up to 5 litres per day. And if you've got pigs, well, they're a lot more thirsty, particularly if there's a lot of little ones running around, or you've got some big fellas. And of course, pigs, unfortunately, mess up the dam and reduce the water quality. And almost certainly you'll have a few of these fellas. Again, there's been some work done there. You can see the sources it's come from, but not sure just what sort of range there might be there. But with roos, most of those are around about 1 to 2 litres per day. And of course, the big question is just how many of them are you supplying water to? That's pretty hard to know exactly. But need to make an estimate, because again, if they're drinking it, your stock can't. And when it's drought, they're always going to come around to you and be very thankful for what you're supplying them. In the workbook, if you've got it open with you, on page 11, there's table 1, And there's an example there, which I've got on the screen, of how to make use of that information I was just taking you through. So if we look here, we're saying on our farm, we've got 1,000 ewes. This is using the example farm that Paul was just talking about, fictitious farm. We're saying we've got 1,000 dry ewes, 10 litres per head per day, and we're assuming a summer period of a full 6 months. That is the beginning of October to the end of March, and that's 181 days. Now, we know that the summer period isn't as intense all the way through, but in drought, it can be intense a lot of the time, more so than usual. And by slightly overestimating this, we're allowing a little bit extra for what might be the winter period. If you wanted to allow directly for the winter period, then of course you can do that. If you wanted to finesse the number of days here, of course you can do that in your own plan. But for now, we're assuming 181 days is the dry period of the year. So if we multiply those together, 1,000 by 10 by 181, we get 1,810,000 litres, or 1.81 megalitres. So that would be the water required for those 1,000 ewes over that 6 months of a dry summer. If you've got beef cattle, we've got 100 of them on our fictitious farm, and we're saying 98 litres per head per day for the same number of days. That gives us 1,773,800 litres, or 1.77 megalitres. And we've thrown in a few grey kangaroos. We're being, I think, rather modest here. I think we're only supplying 10 at a litre per day. They're not very thirsty either. So multiply those three together by 181 and we get 1,810 litres, or 0.18 megalitres. If, of course, we were doing 100 kangaroos, that would be another 10 times there. When we add all those together, we've got a total water requirement for livestock of 3,585,610 litres, or about 3.6 megalitres. Now, I'm just, if you want to, you can jot down a few figures on your table yourself. I won't take the time to go through that because we've got a short period tonight, but the intention is in the workbook you actually do put some figures down, even if they're a little bit of estimates. And then when you do your real template, the clean template book that Sarah mentioned, you can do it more accurately then. We're hoping we're giving you an idea that you can start with tonight. The next step is to consider your domestic requirements. Usually domestic water comes from the same water supply, or commonly as the same water supply as the livestock. And so you need to make an estimate of that usage because, again, if you're using it, then the stock can't drink it. And here's some estimates that come from the Farm Water Ag Guide, and the evaporative air conditioner comes from the Department of Environment publication some years ago. So gardens can use anything up to 10 to 30,000 litres per hectare, depending on how lush your garden is. If you've just got a separate toilet somewhere, that might be 33 litres a person. If we take a total figure for each person, about 180 litres per person per day is a reasonable estimate. And evaporative coolers can use up to 1,000 litres a day, depending on the type of system you're using and just how hot and dry the day is. They're all figures to give you something to go on. And yes, we might come back to that a little bit. You can take different estimates if you have better figures somewhere, but these are good figures to start with if you've never made any sort of estimate of the water around the domestic scene. Other farm uses that require water, and these come from the Water Ag Guide, the thick book that Sarah mentioned. If you do grow any crops, you probably want to spray those with some sort of pesticide, and that could be the spray could require anything from 50 to 150 litres per hectare of water to mix the chemical. So you do need to allow for that. And if you were sheep dipping, a rough figure would be 4 litres per sheep per spray. So that all adds up. There's wash down if you do that, if you have a dairy or piggery or something, or you've got to clean machinery, and I'm just not sure how to estimate that because it's very much depends on what you're doing. Firefighting is something that needs to be allowed for, particularly in drought time. Obviously, the likelihood of fire is much greater in drought than in non-drought. So we want to make sure we've got the water that we need. And in our Ag Guide, it gives us a figure of 10,000 litres per building, but you might feel more comfortable using double that. Many in the course, in the workshops that we've been doing, have wanted to use at least double that, perhaps more, given the experience of a few years ago of severe bushfires. So that's up to you, but certainly you must have some on hand. And firefighting for your house yard, should you get grass fire and so on going through your shrubs, that Ag Guide suggests 72 litres per square metre. And if you're not quite sure about that, there's 10,000 square metres in 1 hectare of your house area. And if anybody still wets down yards, you might need to allow some water for that, such as 100 litres per 10 square metres. Now, I have skipped past the tables in the workbook for those sections. So there's table 2 on page 12, table 3 also on page 12 for the residents, and on page 13 there's table 4 for the spraying and table 5 for firefighting. I'm going to skip past them today because while they're significant and you should make an estimate with them, about them, we won't dwell on it because the next steps are probably more significant. You'll be able to go back and have a try with them, and you can see the examples that have been worked. That section then is looking at the demand or the water required from your farm water supply. Part 3 in your workbook from drop to data is how one component is having a look at the amount of capacity you have in your dams. And this is something that not many people really do, is check it. They just assume that there's plenty of water if the dam's full. But to determine what you've got, you must measure the width and length of the dam, and then also the depth of storage at its deepest point. So you want the longest and the widest and the deepest points. From that information, you calculate the surface area in square metres. That's the length times the width, and that gives you square metres. And the way you do that might vary depending on the shape of the dam, which I'll mention again shortly. Then step 3, you calculate the volume in cubic metres. You do that by getting the surface area, multiplying it by the depth that you've measured, and then a factor of 0.4 to allow for the slopes. In the diagram down here, you can see this would be a dam wall up here, and the slope of the wall and any excavation into the ground is what's called a batter, and we are assuming a slope of 1 to 3, which is fairly standard. And because it's not a straight edge, if it was a straight edge, we wouldn't have to allow a factor, but because it's not a straight edge, then all this area here where there's earth is not holding water. So we have to multiply by this factor of 0.4 to get a realistic figure of the volume. You then got the volume of the dam in cubic metres, and you can convert the cubic metres to litres or megalitres if you wish. How do you measure the depth in the dam? It's not too hard to measure the length and the width. You can paste those out, or if you've got a long tape, you can use that. To measure the depth is a bit more tricky if you don't want to go for a swim or a wade. And there's a tool called Dam Deep, which looks a little bit like this one up here in the top left. The other two pictures show you a little bit about what you might have to do, dry them out, or more importantly, this one on the right, you throw the end of this Dam Deep far out into the centre and let it, with a sinker, let it drop to the bottom, and that will, this little bead here will hold the measurement as the float slides up. And that might sound complicated as I'm explaining it, but you can ask Sarah how to do it. There's a bit of instructions on that, and you can get those for free from Sarah to be able to measure your dam. The different shaped dams need slightly different methods of calculating them to make sure we get a reasonably accurate estimate. If your dam is rectangular or square, you can see the top up here, then we want to go by the length of the dam, the width of the dam, and then the depth at the deepest point. Surface area is width times length. The volume, as we were just saying, is the surface area times the depth times the 0.4 factor. If your dam is circular, then the length and the width are pretty much the same size, but because it's a circle, the surface area is less than for the same dimensions for a rectangular dam. So we take the width by the length, which is often the same, exactly the same length, same measurement, and we multiply that by 0.8 to get our surface area. And then for our volume, we do the same as before, surface area times depth times 0.4. For a gully dam, or sometimes called a triangular dam, because it is going up a gully, the shape of the surface is a triangle, and the shape of the actual water body is a triangle as well. So instead of just width times length as we would with the rectangular one, it's width times length divided by 2. Our surface area is half of what it would be if it was a rectangular dam with those dimensions. Then we get our volume the same way, surface area times depth times 0.4 for the slope or the batter. The bottom one is how to calculate capacity of a tank if you don't already know the capacity of a tank that you might have. I'll leave that one for now. In the workbook on page 15, or page 14 has that set of shapes I was just showing you for your reference. And on page 15, there's an example of some dams. If we have our first one, we're saying we've got 3 dams on our fictitious property. We're saying a square one, 30 metres by 30 metres. And if we multiply those together, we get a surface area of 900 square metres. We've taken the depth with that Dam Deep tool. So then we multiply 900 by 4 metres by 0.4, and we get a volume of 1,440 cubic metres, which is 1.44 megalitres. And for our gully dam, or our triangular dam, our width is 35, our length is 45, we've got the same depth, But our surface area is this times this divided by 2 gives us 788 square metres. Then our volume is this times 4 times 0.4 to give us 1,260 cubic metres or 1.26 megalitres. And with the round dam, the dimensions are the same. The width and the length are both 25 metres. So we multiply those together times 0.8 and we get a surface area of 500 square metres. Then we multiply that by our depth, which in this case is 2 times 0.4, and we get the volume of 400 cubic metres or 0.4 megalitres. And I've also added a couple of small tanks in there, just simply to illustrate the tanks usually don't hold that much water, generally nowhere near as much as the dams, unless you've got a lot of very big tanks. And if we total those together, we have a maximum volume of 3.146 megalitres of water. That's with the dams full and the tanks full to hopefully last us through a dry season. Unfortunately, that's the stock and the feral animals drinking the water are not the only ones taking water. There's evaporation uses or takes a lot of water, unfortunately. This weather information is for Holbrook, and this kind of information can be found from the Bureau of Meteorology website for free. And what we've got here is for the months of the year. In January, the average evaporation is 8 millimetres per day. In February, it's 6.8 millimetres per day. March, it's 5 millimetres per day, and so on. Decile 1 rain means rain, the lowest 10% of rain. The Bureau of Meteorology keep those records and give us ranks of the rain. So it's not the average rainfall, it's decile 1, meaning not much rain, which is what happens in a drought. We get very little. This time, notice that it's millimetres per month. So January, Holbrook, 7.7 millimetres per month. February, 3.3 millimetres per month, and March, 0.9, and so on. So to get our average daily evaporation, I'm going to add, these three here, January, February, March, and these three, October, November, December, because they're our summer months. Those add up to being 37.1 divided by 6, because it's 6 months, and we get 6.2 millimetres per day on average evaporation. For the rainfall we might get that would fall on the dam, we just add these 6, and that comes to 55 millimetres. To get it on a daily basis, 55 divided by 181 gives us 0.3 millimetres. So that's our average decile 1, or our average drought rain, 0.3 of a millimetre per day. So the overall result is our evaporation is 6.2 minus 0.3 is 5 millimetres of evaporation per day. You can't see that, it's just disappearing, and it's happening every good sunny day. We need to go a step further with that and work out just how much volume of water that adds up to. Because if it's going out of our dam to evaporation, our stock can't use it. So what do we get? Our volume loss in litres, surface area of the dam, times the daily evaporation. And for the example we're doing, which you can see, this is table 7A on page 18 of the workbook. Same figures are there. Here's our square dam, and it had 900 square metres. We calculated that before. 181 days for October to March. And here's our daily evaporation of 5.9. So we multiply 900 times 181 times 5.9 gives us 961,110 litres of evaporation out of that dam over the 6 months. For our rectangular dam, we had a surface area of 788 square metres. Here's our 181 days. Here's our 5.9 millimetres of evaporation. So we multiply those three, and this time we get 841,505. And then we're doing the same for our round tank, 500 square metres surface area times those two figures, and we get nearly 534,000 litres. So altogether, if we add that up, our evaporation loss is 2,336,565 litres over the 6 months of that dry spell. That's about 2.3 megalitres. Now that's water that you can't catch, you can't get back, and of course your stock can't drink it. It's a fairly substantial loss. There's also another loss that we can't see, and that's seepage. All earthen dams seep a little bit, and we want them to seep quite slowly. So if a dam has been designed and built well, the seepage will be low. It might be about 1 millimetre per square metre of surface area per day. Once you get up around 5 millimetres per day or more, then the dam is seeping too much. You're losing a lot of water into the ground. Again, you can't see it, although you might see a green patch somewhere downstream of the dam. And you wonder why it's green. Well, the reason will be because it's getting nicely watered by the seepage coming out of the dam. But to calculate our seepage loss, we multiply again by our surface area of square metres, which in our square dam is 900. A number of days is 181, and I've assumed we've got a good dam here. It's only 1 millimetre per day loss. Therefore, there's 181 millimetres. And if we multiply those together, we get 900 by 181, we get 162,900 litres purely of seepage. And then for the other two dams, you can see the figures, which adds up to nearly 400,000 litres of seepage. That's water that your stock can't drink, and it's water for the most part that you can't get back. So we've got two fairly big losses, around about 2.3 megalitres of evaporation and around 0.4 of a megalitre of seepage, which we can't do much about. There's a third chunk of water that really we can't use. It's unavailable to us, and it's the residual or dead storage. And it's usually a relatively small volume of the dam, but if the dam has got an odd shape or hasn't been constructed very well, it could be bigger. Now, what we mean by that, this residual water, at the bottom of the dam, when it's drained right down, there's always a certain amount of water still there that is of such poor quality that the stock probably won't want to drink it. And even if they do want to drink it, you probably don't want them to, because it'll make them sick. And on the way in to get that water, they're quite likely to get bogged, and you'll have to go and pull them out. Hopefully you'll be aware of it before they get dehydrated right down in the middle of the drought time. And if you had a pump, it's the sort of stuff that you don't want to pump because it's sludge, and it's a good way to wreck your pump and to block up all your float valves in troughs or anything if you've got them. So it's water, to all intents and purposes, that we can't use. It just ends up sitting in the bottom. And we need to allow for that because it's water that your stock can't drink. So for our purposes, we are assuming an estimate of 5% of the volume, and that's based on some work done by AgVic, checking a number of dams. So for reasonably well designed and built dams, that's not a bad figure. As I mentioned, it could be worse than that. So on page 20 of your workbook, there's that table to allow, table 8, to allow for the residual water. This time we're using the volume, not the surface area, of 1,440 cubic metres. We take 5% of that, and the residual water is 72 cubic metres or 72,000 litres. There's 1,000 litres in a cubic metre. Our rectangular dam, the volume was 1,260 cubic metres. 5% of that is 63 cubic metres or 63,000 litres. And you can see the same for the round dam. So there's a total of 155,000 litres in our hypothetical farm that just sits in the bottom of the dams that we can't use and don't want to use because it's problematic for us. Now, I'm now at the end of what I wanted to get through for tonight. I'll unshare and hopefully you can see my wonderful face again.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering whether there's anything that we need to go back over there because we moved fairly quickly, or whether there's questions. No, over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Peter. That was very good. Does anyone have any question or need any clarification on any of the steps?
I'm wondering, Peter, just a question. With the ranges in animal per head consumption, I just remember when we were at a workshop the other week at Crookwell, they said because their summers are a little bit cooler than, say, down on the flat country, and they're a bit higher elevation, they suggested that that was part of the reason that their consumption might be more like 8 litres per head for that dry ewe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, Paul. The climate or the weather conditions, just like us, if we're in on the hot plains with hot winds, we need to drink a lot of water. If we go into foothills or somewhere that's a bit cooler, a little bit higher, then we don't need as much water. So yes, it certainly makes sense. And if anybody has that situation, they want to adjust those figures because they think they're slightly over or slightly under, that of course is what we want everyone to do in their own farm plan.
Cool. And Sophie, this one might, you might know a little bit about this. The use of containment areas and stock management areas seems to have gained a bit more popularity. And I'm wondering that those consumption figures from the, I think there's the DPI containment booklet, the figures for the stock in containment seem quite significantly lower than the free range. Is that because they don't have to walk a kilometre or two to the trough or wherever they're trying to graze from? Is that part of the reason why containment is using a bit less water for those animals?
Yeah, I think your assumption sounds right to me. I'm not an expert on their consumption, but we know that when they're in a paddock that they're likely to require 13% more energy because they're walking around and using that energy. And we know that when they eat more, they drink more and vice versa. So that is an explanation I have. It would be interesting.
No, that makes sense. No, that's good. It's good. Thanks. Back to you, Sarah.
Yep. No one, does anyone has any question? Are you planning on working on your plans? You'll have 1 week to go through all of these again until we see each other again next Tuesday. So.
And I was going to suggest, Sarah and Peter, this might be something people can do if they don't know the exact dimensions of the dams, that they can use some estimates and just pace out the sizes if they need to, and take an estimate of what they think the depth might be, just so they've got some material to work on come next week.
Yeah, and also they can use the workshop tools sheet. There are some links there that you can use to estimate your dam capacity. And also, as I said in the chat, if you need a dam deep tool, we can send that to you with the ag guide. So just let me know if you want that, and we can arrange that this week.
Excellent.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Peter and Paul. Is there anything else you would like to cover tonight, or are we all good?
I think we're done. Unless a tone needs anything clarified.
Good day. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I'm still pretty much new into farming, so I've been just listening and taking notes. I've learned so much today in terms of conserving water. I'm based in Botswana in Africa, so our weather is a dry desert kind of weather. So it's interesting to hear from your insights. I believe I'll take into account what I've learned as a growing farmer and exercise it and share with others as well. So I appreciate a lot for your time. Thank you.
That's great. You might have slightly different feral animals to us at home. You might have a few lions or something or other, elephants coming to the drink. I don't know.
Yes, hopefully. I just have goats and sheep. So yeah, that's where I'm now. But yeah, possibly in future have a bit of lions. There's a lot of elephants around the farm that I am. They just pass by. They are wild elephants. So yeah, possibly I'll take them and make them mine in my farm in the near future.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we'll hope you join us next week, because we still have to develop part 4. So yeah, we'll wait for you next week as well at home. And how did you find out about the webinar being there?
Yeah, I always check out events on Eventbrite. That's where I found out about the event. Yes.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Very good.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, and everyone for being here tonight. And if you have any questions or need materials to be sent, just let me know and we can arrange that. At home, there is a guide PDF version that you can buy if you want. I can share the link with you, as we will not be able to post it to you to Africa, but yeah, you can still get the guide if you want. Thank you, Paul, Peter, and Sophie.
Thanks, Sarah.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yep. See you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you. Well done. Good night.
Good night. See you next week.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.